so glad I've got my faith in the Lord. I've got the love of the Lord. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got the love of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the love of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got the joy of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got the joy of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got my faith in the Lord. I've got my faith in the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got my faith in the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got my faith in the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got my faith in the Lord. I'm so glad I've got my faith in the Lord. I've got the love of the Lord. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got the love of the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got the love of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the love of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's showing in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's plain to see. I've got the joy of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the joy. I've got the joy of the joy. I've got the joy. I've got the joy. I've got the joy of the joy of the Lord. I've got the joy of the Lord.
Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with loving zeal, the poor and them that mourn, the faint and overborne, sin sick and sorrow worn, whom Christ doth heal. Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with fervent prayer, the wayward and the lost, by restless passions tossed, redeemed at countless cost from dark despair.
Hello, welcome to our Bible study. My name is Clint McElroy, and today we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 21. The material today contains mature themes, so please be advised before showing this to children. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. Hope to see you there. Masks will be available at the door for anyone who needs one. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. We'll also be meeting at 9 a.m. for classes, so please join us for those. You're welcome to join us in the auditorium to watch this class on the large screen there. We have these English Standard Version Bibles available for anyone who'd like to have one. If you care to have one, please contact our church office and we'll make arrangements to get you one. Our sick list is long, so please refer to our bulletin for more information. Do please keep in your prayers the people suffering from violence, both here in this country and also abroad, especially those in the war zone of Ukraine, and also keep in your prayers the potential of violence in regards to Taiwan We'll pray for our president who has been diagnosed again with COVID. I understand from the most recent news report that I've heard. We've had many removed from our sick list because they are in much better shape than they were. So we're very happy that God has answered our prayers. As is our custom, we want to keep in mind the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus. They were joined by a third man on the way. When they got to their destination, that third man revealed himself to be Jesus, the resurrected Savior, then left their company. As they reflected on the time that they had spent with him, they realized that there had been a burning in their heart while he was with them. It's that burning that they had in their hearts that we hope to kindle in our own hearts by drawing closer to the Lord through a study of his word. We also want to keep in mind the admonitions of Leviticus chapter 19, to be holy for the Lord our God is holy. And we also want to remember the story of Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and the prophet that came to Jeroboam. Rehoboam received the kingdom from Solomon after Solomon's passing, and in following bad advice from young advisors, he brought hardship on the people of Israel, and as a result, the people of Israel rebelled against him, and there was a division. God had predicted this. It was actually a judgment against Solomon for the things that Solomon had done that caused these things to come about, and he had appointed Jeroboam to take charge of this northern kingdom when it separated from the kingdom that Rehoboam inherited. Jeroboam knew about this even during the time of Solomon, and so he lived in exile until the time that Solomon died. But he came back and took charge of the northern tribes as the kingdom of Israel. Now, he did not do what God had advised him to do. Instead, he saw that the people of Israel were going down into Jerusalem to worship the Lord, and he didn't like that. So he set up high places in the mountains and told the people that they should worship God that had delivered them from Egypt there. This was an abomination to the Lord. The Lord didn't just let Jeroboam do this. He sent a prophet from Judah. That prophet came and told Jeroboam that he was doing wrong. Jeroboam ignored him. There's a whole story about that. It's a very interesting read. But the point here is that he was warned, and he still chose to follow his own path against God's will. Now, this prophet that came to tell Jeroboam that he was doing wrong had also been instructed to go home after doing so, and he was on his way home when he was met in the way by a prophet from Israel who had heard of his presence there and wanted the honor of his company. This prophet from Israel told the prophet from Judah that he'd received message from the Lord that the prophet from Judah should have a meal with him. The prophet from Judah liked this, so he went home with the prophet from Israel to have a meal with him, and found out that this was not God's will, and that God was going to require his life of him because of it. And indeed, he did die as he tried to go home from there. It's a terrible story. It's a terrible story of misplaced trust. It's a terrible story of the way God looks at disobedience. Even in the light of someone else telling a false narrative, he is more concerned about the person that believed the false narrative than the person who told the false narrative. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It is reflective of the relationship that God had with Israel from that point forward, because they believed the lie of Jeroboam and let the people continually worship God in those mountainous places where God had not authorized worship. It's terrible to see that this had happened to the people of Israel. It's terrible to imagine that we may fall prey to the same thing today. We have to take care that the messages we believe to be from God are in fact from God. That's why we study. We study so that we can identify when someone is bringing us a message that is in accord with God's word, and recognize messages that are not in accord with God's word. So I hope you will go with me now as we enter into this study, that you will be encouraged by what we find there. 2 Samuel chapter 21 from the English Standard Version. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord, and the Lord said, "There is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites, although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them. Saul had sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. Verse 3. And David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement, that you may bless the heritage of the Lord?" The Gibeonites said to him, "It is not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house, neither is it for us to put any man to death in Israel." And he said, "What do you say that I shall do for you?" They said to the king, "The man who consumed us and planned to destroy us, so that we should have no place at all in the territory of Israel, let 7 of his sons be given to us, so that we may hang them before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord." And the king said, "I will give them." Verse 7. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son, Jonathan, because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. The king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, Arlani and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Merab, the daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Maholathite. Verse 9. And he gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. And the 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first days of harvest, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Verse 10. Then Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock, from the beginning of harvest until rain fell upon them from the heavens. And she did not allow the birds of the air to come upon them by day, or the beasts of the field by night. When David was told what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done, David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of his son Jonathan from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them on the day the Philistines killed Saul on Gilboa. Verse 13. And he brought up from there the bones of Saul and the bones of his son Jonathan, and they gathered the bones of those who were hanged, and they buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the land of Benjamin and Zelah, in the tomb of Kish his father, and they did all that the king commanded. And after that, God responded to the plea for the land. Verse 15. There was war again between the Philistines and Israel, and David went down together with his servants, and they fought against the Philistines. And David grew weary. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and who was armed with a new sword, thought to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." Verse 18. After this there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. Then Zibekai the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. And there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. And Elhanan, the son of Jair-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Verse 20. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand, and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Okay, so last time we studied out of chapter 20 the story of Sheba and the rebellion that followed after the rebellion of Absalom. Now the people at the end of chapter 19 had come to restore David to the throne after the death of Absalom, and the people of the tribe of Judah came first to do so after they had been embarrassed by David, because the people of Israel had already started to discuss this and were intending to come do this, and the people of Judah had not yet considered it. So then the people of Israel came and met the people of Judah and some of the people of Israel who were already with David there as he was coming into Jerusalem, and they were jealous that they had not waited for them to come and be part of this celebration. And it's these men, I believe, that we see in the very first part of chapter 20, who followed Sheba the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, as he blew the trumpet and said, in verse 1, "We have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tents, O Israel." And it says in verse 2, "All the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem." Then we see David return to his house, where he found the 10 concubines he had left to care for the house. And these were the same 10 concubines that Absalom had abused sexually before all the people of Israel in order to make himself a stench to his father. He took these 10 concubines and put them in their own house under guard, and it says he provided for them for the rest of their lives, and he never went back into them for any form of companionship. So they lived as if they were widows from that point forward. It's a sad end for them. In verse 4, he calls to Amasa and says, because he promised Amasa that he would be the leader of his army, he calls Amasa and says to him, "Take 3 days to gather up the men of Judah and then report back here to me." And Amasa goes out to summon Judah, but he's delayed. It takes him longer than 3 days. So David calls Abishai and take the house guard and go after Sheba the son of Bichri, because he'll do us more harm than Absalom did. So Abishai took the household guard, which was made up of the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, and he went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba. When they came to the great stone that was at Gibeon, it says in verse 8, Amasa met them there. Now Joab was with Abishai, and he was wearing a soldier's garment, and over his garment was a belt with a sword. And the sword fell as Amasa came close, and Joab bent down to pick it up. And as he arose, he made as if he was greeting Amasa, and reached out to him with his right hand, while he used his left hand with the sword to cut Amasa's belly open. And it says that Amasa fell dead there. Then it says there at the end of verse 10 that Joab and Abishai pursued Sheba from that point. And there was one of Joab's young men who came and stood by Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." And as they attempted to do so, they kept stopping and looking at Amasa laying there, who was not quite dead apparently, who was still wallowing in the filth and the muck of his entrails. So this young man took Amasa and drug him into the field nearby and covered him with a garment, so that the soldiers would stop gawking at him, and they went on to follow Joab and Abishai in pursuit of Sheba. So they pursued him to a town called Abel of Beth-Maachah, and Sheba and all of his men went into Abel of Beth-Maachah, and then Joab came and laid siege to the city, and they built up ramparts against the walls immediately. And as they were building these ramparts and preparing to tear down the walls, a woman called out from the wall saying, Listen, tell Joab, come here that I may speak to you." So Joab came near, and she said, "Are you Joab?" And he responds, "I am." Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your servant," at the end of verse 17. And he answered, "I am listening." Then she said, "They used to say in former times, 'Let them but ask counsel at Abel,' and so they settled a matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord?" And Joab answers in verse 20, "Far be it from me, far be it that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give up him alone, and I will withdraw from the city." And the woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head shall be thrown to you over the wall." Then she went into the town and told them, and they cut off Sheba's head and threw it out to Joab. And he blew his trumpet, and the army dispersed, and Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king. So it was an incredible story of this woman taking charge, and Joab being very reasonable about his expectations, and they took care of the problem very straightforward way. It says at the very end of the chapter, the administration of David was made up of Joab in command of all the army of Israel. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was in command of the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was in charge of the forced labor. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Sheva was the secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira the Jerite, was also David's priest. So that's who made up David's administration. Going on into chapter 21, we see the avenging of the Gibeonites against the house of Saul. And we see this war of the Philistines that's recorded at the end of chapter 21. So the end of chapter 21 corresponds to the end of chapter 20 of First Chronicles. So this is kind of an interesting footnote. We see the story that's recorded in First Chronicles chapter 20 is the very first few verses of 2 Samuel chapter 11, and then we skip all the way to chapter 21 in 2 Samuel to pick up on the narrative that's recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 20. Also in 1 Chronicles chapter 20, there are fewer giants mentioned than there are here in 2 Samuel chapter 21. And the names are slightly different. There seems to have been a clarification by the time that 1 Chronicles was written in the name, especially that of Goliath that's recorded here in chapter 21 of 2 Samuel, is referred to as a brother of Goliath, the giant that David had killed earlier. In 1 Chronicles chapter 20, it's referring to that person as a brother of Goliath. So that is a slight differentiation, clarification possibly, that the writers in 1 Chronicles knew to record in 1 Chronicles in the time that 1 Chronicles was written down. Now, is that true? I don't have any way to verify that. I'm not sure that they knew it as certainly as they seem to, because they wrote down the story of 3 of these giants when it's explicitly stated that there were 4 here in this chapter. So just that is said, we'll go on into chapter 21. It says in verse 1, "Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year." So David took this to mean that there was something wrong. It was apparently not uncommon for them to have problems with their climate. They had issues with famine and drought, just like we do. But when you had it for long-term periods, David recognized this was something beyond natural occurrence. This had to do with the way the people were being treated by God. And he came and sought the face of the Lord. And the Lord said, "There is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." So this is significant because all of Israel was being punished for the action of a dead king who was already dead because he displeased the Lord. The Lord did not leave the matter as settled as far as the guilt that Saul bore for his killing of all those Gibeonites. So this was now faced by the people of Israel. They were having to deal with this guilt that was borne out against Saul for these deaths. Now you can look to current events and see that we in our time have similar issues that may possibly explain much in our current events. I'm not going to make any conclusions or draw any correlations for you. I'm just going to say that I personally look to current events in much the same way that we see David looking at his situation here. Going on, there is blood guilt on Saul. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, remember, it's explaining here in the passage, but the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. That's key. So the people had made an oath to these people, the Gibeonites, and they were expected by God to keep this oath. And this is an important thing. When a group of people represented by an authority make an agreement with another group of people before the Lord, that agreement is expected to be carried out, whether you find it nice and comfortable to do so at a later date or not. And that is as much as I'll get into current events. David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement that you may bless the heritage of the Lord?" So he was seeking a deliverance from their need to have some kind of resolution to this issue. The Gibeonites said to him, It is not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house. Neither is it for us to put any man to death in Israel," which is an interesting thing because of what follows. So they're saying we don't want any gold or silver, we don't want payment, and we're not interested in killing anybody specifically in Israel at large. But David said, "What do you say that I shall do for you?" And they said to him, "The man who consumed us and planned to destroy us, so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel, let 7 of his sons be given to us, that we may hang them before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul." So they kind of go back on what they said about it not being a matter between them and Saul or his house. This is definitely asking something of the house of Saul. And they didn't ask for material wealth. They asked for his heritage, his family offspring, of which there were not many left. Most had died along with Saul on the day of his death in the battle with the Philistines. But some few, a small remnant of his family had survived. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, was, I believe, one of the only who were legitimate blood descendants of Saul. The others were all sons of concubines or sons of possibly the marriage of Michal to the person she married instead of David. That's a question I have here. It's not resolved in anything I've read. But going on, the king said, "I will give them," at the end of verse 6. And the king spared Mephibosheth, it says, because of his relationship with Jonathan and his oath before the Lord. But he took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, and she was a concubine, and their names were Armoni and Mephibosheth as well, and the 5 sons of Merab. Now, I've got a footnote here that Merab may be Michal, and that makes more sense to me than it does to have someone else here. So if this is Michal, I don't think she had any children with David at any point, so these would have been sons to the other man she was married to, and possibly explains some of the animosity she had toward David in this later part of her life that is only vaguely alluded to earlier. It goes on to identify specifically whom she bore to Adriel, the son of Barzillai the Maholathite. So these names are not similar to the earlier passage. The name there is identified as Laish, so I don't know that this is a reasonable explanation at this point to say that Merab is Michal, but it is a footnote I have here. And they hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. 7 of them perished there together in the first days of the harvest, and that being a reference because of the rest of the story here. In verse 10, Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock. So basically she camped out before these men who'd been hanged, and she fought off the birds and she fought off the beasts to keep them from being violated. And when David heard what Rizpah had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and Jonathan from the people of Jabesh Gilead, who'd rescued the bones from the Philistines, if you'll remember that story. And he brought them up and took the bones of these men who'd been hanged and buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the land of Benjamin and Zelah in the tomb of Kish, his father. And after that, God responded to the plea for the land. So this is an important thing to me out of this passage. Things that are wrong must be set right, and when things have been set right, God responds immediately to release whatever burden he's placed on people in judgment. This is an important point, and it's important, I think, for us today in our current events to think about the world events in the terms that God looks at things. When people give their word to do something and don't follow through, God holds those people responsible for the results of that not following through. And if that means people die because you didn't keep your word, what might God require of the people that didn't keep their word before he allows the blessings to return? So I think this is a good lesson to take away from this. not just speaks to nations, but it speaks to individuals. We have a responsibility before the Lord to keep our word when we give it, and if we don't keep our word, we may suffer consequences until a resolution is provided before the Lord. So we must be mindful of these things. And this is as regards to marriage, this is as regards to business, this is as regards to family relationships, whatever it may be with friends. It doesn't really matter. If we give our word, we should keep our word. And if we don't keep our word, we should expect to have some unpleasant experiences that follow until such time as those that we've mistreated in not keeping our word are satisfied, and the Lord can be satisfied that the agreement has been kept. So this is an important thing to give some consideration to. Then we go on into verse 15 and following, the war with the Philistines. There are mentioned here again 4 different giants. There was war with the Philistines, and there is the giant Ishbi-Benob who set out to seek out David and kill him. It says in verse 17 that Abishai the son of Zeruiah came to David's aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." So because David had grown weary, at the end of verse 15, which I skipped over, he was not able to fight well with Ishbi-Benob, and Abishai had to come to his rescue. And this was when David was told by those who were fighting with him he was more of a liability than an asset. When they had to stop what they're doing in order to defend him, it was not good for their tactics. And if he were to die in battle, it would be very bad for Israel. They would be devastated from a morale perspective. After this, in verse 18, there was a war with the Philistines at Gob, and it tells that this man is Sibbecai the Hushathite, struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. And then there was another war at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of Jeroham, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite. So this is the one that's mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 20 as being the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who was the giant that David killed earlier. The shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again a war at Gath. So now we've got 3 who've been mentioned, giants. Now there's a 4th. There was a war at Gath where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and was also a descendant of the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, David's nephew from Shemaiah, his brother, struck him down. So these were the 4 giants from Gath that fell to David and his army after the events of the rebellions. So it's an interesting story. First of all, of these giants, we don't have a lot of physical evidence of giants. Much of what has been found or said of giants in archaeology has proven to be fraudulent, but I absolutely believe they existed. They're recorded here. There's no reason to believe they didn't exist. The lack of physical evidence is obvious why that would be the case. These would be trophies among men, and they would soon be destroyed in other altercations, or perhaps they were reused in various ways that we don't recognize at this late point. Certainly very few things would have made it into this current time period untouched, unaltered. So there's certainly no reason to believe that the lack of physical evidence is in any way evidence that there were no giants. That's almost absurd. Now, if you're a non-believer and you don't want to believe the story here that there were giants in the land, there are lots of problems with that, because there is some physical evidence. And there is an interesting find recently of a tomb that was altered, and they found components in the tomb which many in archaeology don't want to identify as pieces of armor, but clearly they appear to be pieces of armor. They fit together as armor should fit, but they're so much larger than armor would be for a normal man. Archaeologists who don't believe in giants refuse to believe that this was armor for a giant. So we have that little problem, little conundrum in the world of archaeologists, what they look at when they find things, how they understand things they dig up out of the dirt. If they don't want to believe in giants, then they can't obviously find evidence of giants. It's not the way science is supposed to work, but unfortunately, some people look to science as a religion rather than as a tool for understanding the world around us. I hope you found a word of encouragement in today's study. Certainly a very interesting passage about the giants, as well as this act of reconciliation, perhaps, of the Gibeonites to Israel. I don't really know what to make of that in general, because the Lord really didn't like the people of the land, but he wanted the people to honor their obligations to the Gibeonites here, and they had one. They had an obligation. Even though the man who had committed the atrocity was dead, there was still an obligation to make things right, and David was called on to do that. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. Hope to see you there. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. God bless and have a great week.